Can we just print our way out of it? Watch this video and let's find out. We all know that economics affects our lives in a profound manner, but most of the economic commentary is just gobbledygook and really makes no sense. That's why I wrote The Economic Comic, where you can learn the basics of economics just by reading a comic book. So sit tight and let's jump into today's video. Okay, hi everyone, this is Ken DeLong, author of The Economic Comic. And before we get started, I want to address these empty shelves behind me. If you've watched some of my videos before, you're used to seeing me sit in front of shelves full of books, and in particular, all my books on economics and finance. I usually have them right behind me. But this time, what happened is my family, we decided to move, and we packed everything up, and then we decided to postpone the move. So here I am with my empty bookshelves. The one book I managed to salvage is Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, potentially the most important economics book ever written, so at least I'm in good company here. So we're not completely devoid of the great masters. So what I want to talk to you about in this video is the current economic crisis. I'm recording this in September of 2020. And a lot of people calling for, well, why can't we just print our way out of it? You know, people haven't been working, they haven't been getting paid, they're running out of money. Let's just print money and give it to them, and it'll be just fine. So I want to look in this video and examine, is that really true? Does it work that way? And before we start on the little animation that I prepared for you, there's a couple of things I just want to point out. So number one is, if it was possible for a country to get rich simply by printing more money, wouldn't everyone be rich by now? I mean, countries have tried this famous example, right? The Roman Empire tried this. Their civilization collapsed, right? Some of the ancient North American civilizations I've heard actually started inflating their currencies, printing more currency. Their civilizations collapsed. Weimar Germany collapsed. Like everyone who's tried this, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, their civilization ends up collapsing. So I would submit point number one as history, right? If we're 0 and 70 on a strategy, it's probably not a good idea to do it the 71st time and say, well, maybe it'll work this time. Let's give it one more good try. Give it the college try. And let's see if we can, maybe we'll destroy ourselves. Maybe not. Who knows? That doesn't seem like a prudent course of action. All right. So point number two is something I heard a very interesting interview one time. There was an interviewer on a podcast or something talking to a professor of, maybe he was a professor of Marxism or social democracy or something like that. And a subject came up of, there was a country in Africa that was having a famine. I believe it was Chad, but I don't remember. And they said, yeah, people in Chad, they're starving to death. Like people are on the verge of starvation. And the interviewer asks the professor, so you think that's simply because they don't have enough government redistribution? And the professor says, yeah, if they had, Social Security and wealth tax, then they'd be just fine. And the interviewer responds by saying, I think it's because they're not growing enough food. All right, so you can decide if there's a famine somewhere, is it because there's not enough taxes and redistribution, or is it because they're not growing enough food? You think about that one for a while, all right? Okay, so but now, as we usually do with the economic comic, we're going to go back to first principles, to very simple comic book level economies, and try to think this through from first principles. So I'm going to do this with you on a animation. So let's get that started. All right, we'll start by looking at this simple economy with two people. You might call this a comic economy. And so on the left, we have an apple farmer who produces apples. And on the right, we have an orange farmer who produces oranges. So at the end of the season, the apple farmer has more apples than he really wanted to eat. And the orange farmer has more oranges than he cared to eat. And they both love to eat something different. So they trade with each other. And now they each have, a little bit more variety of food. This is very simple specialization of labor or division of labor and trade situation here. But let's stop and think about this. How did the apple farmer pay for the oranges? Okay, well, you say, well, he paid with his apples, right? So what do the apples represent? They represent his production, right? In order to get those apples, he had to invest his own labor, his own time, his own resources in getting some apple trees, planting them, fertilizing them, weeding out, pruning the apple trees each season, watering them, fertilizing them, spraying them, and basically working his butt off to produce these apples, right? So those apples represent his labor, his effort, his production, and he uses his production, the apples that he produced, to acquire oranges, which he then consumes, right? Puts them in a basket, puts them on the table, and he and his family eat the oranges. But let's remember that the way he acquired these consumer goods, these oranges, was he pays with his production, right? His production of apples paid for the oranges. He couldn't obtain the oranges until he had some apples to trade for them, and he didn't have any apples until he produced them. So production comes first, you produce more than you consume, and then you trade that excess with someone else for stuff that they've produced, and then you can consume that. Okay, well, a two-person economy is too simple, even for the economic comic. So let's introduce a third person. We'll have a guy, let's say a shoemaker who makes boots, right? And so now we have a slightly more complex economy. Let's take a look at how they might trade with each other. The apple farmer takes his excess apples and trades them with the shoemaker for the boots. And then the farmer decides, actually, I don't want the boots. I'd really actually want the oranges. So he may actually go ahead and trade that with the orange farmer for the oranges. Okay, the shoemaker doesn't really like oranges, so he's happy to keep the apples, and the orange farmer really needs a new pair of boots. So in the end here, everybody's happy. How did the apple farmer obtain his oranges? How did the orange farmer get the boots? How did the shoemaker get the apples? What did they use to pay? They paid with their production, right? Again, when you acquire other things and trade with other people, you have to trade with them stuff that you produced. And so you have to produce it first before you can trade it. All right, now let's take a look at another scenario. Let's say this year, the apple farmer doesn't have any apples. Maybe there was a flood, or there was disease, or maybe he was just lazy and didn't feel like working the fields this year. He thought he'd just sit at home and watch Netflix. Or, maybe the government forbade him to hire workers or to leave his home because there was a pandemic, and so he was locked down, and as a result, he has no extra apples. How's he going to get his stuff? Well, usually he trades the apples with the shoemaker for shoes, but the shoemaker is in the same situation. He's spent a lot of time and effort making these boots, right? He had to buy all the leather, all the different little tools and the different little connectors and things like that. And he had to prepare the leather, and he had to cut it and sew it. And it's a ton of work. And while instead of taking care of his family, he was making these crazy boots. He's not going to give those boots away for free, because he spent all that time not providing for his family. He needs to get something for these boots. Otherwise, everyone's going to go hungry. So he's not going to trade with the apple farmer. And now, usually the apple farmer, what he used to do was exchange his boots for the oranges. That's not going to happen either, because he don't have the boots now. So you say, well, the shoemaker could still exchange with the orange farmer. Well, remember, the shoemaker doesn't like oranges. So he definitely wants to trade his shoes, but there's no one in this small economy, there's no one that has anything that he wants. So he ends up with extra pair of shoes. The orange farmer ends up with oranges and without anything else, and no trade happens here. So notice that for the apple farmer, no production, no consumption, right? If you don't produce anything, you can't trade it away to get things to consume, right? The other people are producing things in the hopes of trading it away to get stuff to consume. The other actors in the economy, if it was like a hunter-gatherer society, they'd be out every day hunting and gathering and providing for themselves and their families so they wouldn't die of starvation. But if they think they're going to be able to trade stuff, maybe they'll sit down like the shoemaker and make an extra pair of boots that they don't actually need, but maybe someone else could use it. And the only reason they would do that is to trade it for something that they could consume, some food or clothing or something like that. And if the other counterparty has not produced anything, then there's nothing to trade for. So there's no point in them trading. So you can't consume unless you produce. Now, the fact that, let's skip back a slide, the fact that there's no exchange in this economy at all, that's really just an artifact of the fact that it's a teeny tiny economy with three actors. And also, we're doing barter here. And so we're running into the problem of what they call coincidence of wants. So the orange farmer wants the boots, but the shoemaker doesn't want the oranges. So he's not going to trade. And so this is a big problem with barter, is that if the other person doesn't want what you produce, if you're a shoemaker and the other person doesn't want shoes, like, what do? You can't get anything from them. So let's go to a money economy. Let's just assume all three of them could have money, but let's just, for the keeping the picture clean, let's just look at the coins that the shoemaker has. All right, so now we're going to start doing monetary exchanges. So instead of bartering, the shoemaker is going to send the coins to the apple farmer, and he's going to acquire the apples like that. And now the apple farmer's got some money in his pocket, so he goes to the orange farmer and says, hey man, I want to buy your oranges. That's great. And then the orange farmer takes those coins and says, well, I need a new pair of boots. So he goes down to the shoemaker and buys a new pair of boots. So notice we end up the same way we did with barter when everyone was producing. The shoemaker eats the apples, the apple farmer eats the oranges, and the orange farmer gets a nice new pair of boots. And the money just circulated around the economy here. It came right back to where it started in this little cartoon. So how did they pay for their goods? Now you might be tempted, if I'd started on this side, you would say, well, how did the shoemaker get the apples? He paid for them with money, right? But now we realize that the way you get the money is from trading your production, right? So how did the apple farmer get the money to buy the oranges? Well, he sold his apples to the shoemaker, right? So he sold his production. All that money does, it acts as a medium of exchange, and it allows you to decouple the two sides of the transaction, right? So in the beginning, without money, the apple farmer trades his apples directly for the shoemaker's boots. With money as an intermediate, you can just trade the apples for money. And then you can take that money later and you could buy boots, or you could buy oranges, you could buy whatever you want. So you still are paying with your production. Money is just a medium of exchange. It doesn't really change the fundamental nature of it. It just makes everything a lot more convenient. And if you look at this picture, you say, well, how come the shoemaker started off with money? Well, how do you think he got the money? He produced some boots before and sold them to somebody else, and they gave him money for it. That's why he started with money, right? If he never produced anything, he wouldn't have any money. All right. Now, in this money economy, what's going to happen if the apple farmer decides, you know what? I don't really want to produce anything. This is kind of too much work. And so he has no apples for sale. Well, again, he can't buy the oranges. He has no money, right? In other words, no output, no production. Well, that's kind of sad, right? So government shows up and says, oh, the poor apple farmer, it's hurting the economy. He doesn't have any money, so let's fabricate some new money and give it to him. Now, I'm representing money here by these gold coins, right? And the government can't just fabricate new gold coins out of nothing. It has to go mine them. It takes a lot of work and energy. It can't just print them up. It's not like electronic money where you could just type it into a computer. It's not like paper money where it costs like almost nothing to print. Gold money is hard to come by, which is why governments loathe it and hate it. But let's just pretend that these coins represent like paper dollars. So the government says, oh, poor apple farmer doesn't have any production to sell. Here, let me give you some money. Okay, so we've injected new money into the economy. Now he can buy the oranges just like before. And the orange farmer can buy his boots just like before. And the shoemaker, yeah, well, there's nothing for him to buy, is there? He's got a lot more money than before, but the apples that he normally buys were not produced by the apple farmer. And therefore, there's nothing for him to buy. So he gets all these gold coins, which, in the absence of stuff to buy are kind of useless. You can use it as a paperweight, I guess, but you can't eat them. You can't build a house out of them. You can't make clothes out of them. So that's really unfortunate. So printing money, like fabricating new money and handing it out to people, just enables them to consume without production, right? The apple farmer got to eat the oranges without having produced any apples. And we've been saying through this whole presentation, well, you can't do that. You got to produce something first, because otherwise nobody will trade with you. Well, here he got a fake certificate saying he had produced something in the past. You can think of money as a way of proving to people, like, yeah, I produced something, like, see, someone gave me money for it. So he got this free money without doing anything, and therefore he was able to consume those oranges, and he didn't contribute anything to the economy. And so as a group, these guys are worse off, right? They used to have apples, oranges, and boots, and now they only have oranges and boots as a group. So they're poorer than they were before, right? They have less to eat. So as a group, they're worse off because of the money printing, which enabled the apple farmer to consume those oranges without producing anything. Now, this could keep going, right? So the apple farmer says, hey, this is easy. I can just get this free money from the government. And every cycle, every season, I just get more and more oranges, and the orange farmer can buy more and more boots from the shoemaker. And all the shoemaker gets are these lousy coins, right? Which he has nothing to spend it on. He doesn't like oranges, and he's got plenty of shoes. Like, he's the shoemaker, right? So this just builds up to like this excess of cash in the economy. And then at some point, the apple farmer, or maybe even a different apple farmer, enters the economy. It doesn't matter. Eventually, there's some apples on the market. Okay, and the shoemaker's like, oh, finally, this is what I've been waiting for. I'd love to buy apples. But he's got all these coins now, and he doesn't want anyone else to buy the apples, so he can bid up the price really high. And so now you start to see price inflation, right? Because of all this excess money that's floating around the economy, when these goods do come on the market, the price can get bid up quite high. And so money printing enables consumption without production, right? This apple farmer, he's getting all this fake money every year. He ends up, consuming all this stuff, in this case represented by oranges, and he's never contributed anything. So if you consume things without producing them, you're going to get poorer and poorer. Think of a single person. Like, if you're a farmer and you grow 1,000 bushels of wheat a year, but you eat 1,100 bushels a year, you eat more than you consume more than you produce, pretty soon you're going to be starving to death, right? What you want to do is produce 1,000 bushels a year and only consume 900 of them. Then you can save 100. And now not only can you trade it with other people, but you have a little bit of a storage for a rainy day in case something bad happens. You have some extra stuff to eat. So consumption without production is very, very bad. It means that as a whole, the economy gets poorer and poorer and poorer. Now, in a real economy, of course, let's pop back here. There's more than 3 actors, and there's more than 3 types of goods, right? So this is very oversimplified. In a real economy, there's hundreds of millions of actors, and there's hundreds of millions of goods and services. And when the orange farmer sells his oranges, he doesn't just buy boots. He buys boots and gasoline for the tractors and fertilizer and all kinds of things, broccoli and, a new jacket. He doesn't just spend all his money on one good. So, in a real economy, the money doesn't pile up with one person like this. That's kind of silly. But it's just an artifact of how simple we made the diagram here. But in a real economy with hundreds of millions of people, the same thing happens. If people are handed fake money, then they consume without producing. And when your consumption is greater than your production, everybody starts to get poor. Everything gets a little bit less available. But the amount of money is getting larger and larger, and so eventually that's going to lead to price inflation. So this underscores the difference between things like apples, oranges, and boots, which is real wealth, right? This is produced by real people working real hours in the day. It's consumed by real people. Apples are produced by the apple farmer. They're sold to other people, and then those people eat those apples, right? They literally consume them, right? So this is what real wealth is, and that's what makes us rich, is that we have all this nice stuff. Money is not real wealth. Money is a medium of exchange. Money is super convenient because when the apples are ready, the oranges aren't ready yet. And so what the apple farmer can do, instead of having to store the apples until the oranges are ready, which might mean some of them spoil and he'd lose some, or rats would get in there or something like that, he can sell the apples to someone who wants them. They can eat the apples while they're fresh, and he can accept money, which kind of stores that 1/2 side of the transaction until the oranges are ready. Then he can take the money to the orange farmer, and he can buy the oranges fresh off the tree with the money that he's got. So he doesn't have to hold on to the apples and make the apples for oranges exchange all at the same time. He can exchange the money first, and later on he can exchange the money again for the oranges. And of course, it also solves the problem of like, well, what if the other guy doesn't like apples? Then what am I going to do? I can't even get what I want from him because he doesn't like apples, right? So it points out that real wealth is the stuff we produce, and money is not real wealth. So injecting money into the economy cannot make us wealthier. That's ridiculous. And people think that's true. It's like, well, can't the government just print money and hand it out to people? No. Because people have to produce, everyone has to produce more if we want more, if we want to consume more. Let's not remember again, one of the major things that people don't understand about the economy, and that it's so obvious that it's slapping you in the face, is that real wealth, like apples, oranges, and shoes, doesn't exist for all time, right? Apples need to be grown. They need to be produced. Somebody needs to work there. They need to take care of the trees. They need to fertilize them, water them, protect them from pests and predators. And they need to, grow those apples nice. And now once they've been produced, then they can be consumed. Once they're consumed, they're gone, right? Once you take this basket of apples and you eat them all, you don't have apples anymore. If you want more apples, someone has to go produce more apples. You can't just print money and think that apples are going to appear out of nowhere. Same thing for oranges, same thing for boots. Someone has to sit down and make this pair of boots, and they have to sew it all together and put the soles on and all the leather and make the shoestrings and things like that. And then once they're produced, you get to consume them. You get to wear them, right? You can wear them around the farm, or you're stomping around doing all your work. But after a year or two, they fall apart and they need to be thrown away. And now you don't have the luxury of the boots anymore. And if you want more boots, someone has to produce them, right? If people have stopped producing boots 2 years from now when yours wear out, then guess what? You go barefoot, right? Regardless of how much more money is printed, that doesn't matter. Someone's got to produce the wealth. And printing money and throwing it into the economy enables people to consume without production. And that just means there's less stuff left over for everyone. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that clarified some of the issues for you. And so this is Ken DeLong, the author of the Economic Comic, and I just want to remind you to think for yourself, use your own brain, figure this stuff out on your own, come to your own conclusions, and if you can do that, we'll see you here on the next video. Hey guys, if you want to understand more about economics, but you're just tired of the jargon and the technobabble of professional economists and media pundits, then check out my book, The Economic Comic, which is available on Amazon. There you can learn some of the concepts of economics through comics. Thanks for listening.